April rain drummed softly against the windows as I made my morning tea. Lakewood was always generous with rain, especially in spring when the lake seemed to empty itself into the sky. I sat by the window, Earl Grey cooling in my cup, and watched droplets slide down the glass into whimsical shapes. My name is Merle Hadley, and in 3 days I would turn 68. For 40 years, I taught mathematics at Lakewood High School, explaining to restless teenagers the beauty of numbers and logic. Now retired. My days were filled with chores, quiet routines, and too much time to think. The thought of my upcoming birthday pulsed at the edges of my mind. Would I celebrate alone again last year? There had been no phone call, just a text from my daughter-in-law, Tabitha, apologizing that my son Gar was in a meeting and the children were at practice. "We'll call you soon," she had written. But no one ever did. That absence still ached more than I liked to admit. The ring of the phone startled me from my reverie. An unfamiliar woman introduced herself as Patricia from Lakewood Glamour Beauty Salon, confirming my appointment for the next morning at 10 o'clock. I hadn't booked anything, but when I opened my mouth to correct her, something stopped me. Perhaps a little change was what I needed before my birthday. "Yes," I said, surprising myself. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I went upstairs and opened my closet. My clothes were sensible, the muted wardrobe of a retired schoolteacher. Yet tucked in the corner was a blue dress my late husband Frank had given me. Saying it matched my eyes. I held it against myself in the mirror. The wrinkles around my face had deepened. My hair long since turned silver, but my eyes were still the same deep shade of blue. Frank had died suddenly of a heart attack 10 years ago. Sometimes his absence felt like yesterday. Sometimes like another life entirely. Every corner of this house still carried his imprint, the shelves he built, the garden bench he restored, the table he sanded smooth with his own hands. I often spoke to him in quiet moments, especially when loneliness pressed too heavily. "Do you think they'll come this year?" I whispered to his memory, meaning Gar, his wife Tabitha, and their children, 16-year-old Octavia and 12-year-old Fletcher. At Christmas, we had all sat together, but the evening was stiff, filled with strained smiles. Tabitha had barely hidden her irritation. Gar had been distant, and the grandchildren had answered me with distracted one-word replies while staring at their phones. I remembered when Gar was little, running to me with homework problems or goals scored on the soccer field. Frank used to joke that I loved our son more than him because Gar was his carbon copy, but somewhere along the way, as high school and poor choices came, and later when Tabitha entered his life, that closeness thinned. After Frank died, the distance became an uncrossable gulf. The rain intensified outside, so I busied myself with cleaning, scrubbing floors, and washing windows, until finally I pulled out the family albums. I flipped through pictures of Gar taking his first steps, his graduation, and our last trip to the lake before Frank passed. I searched for the exact moment when our bond unraveled, but no photograph could tell me that. The doorbell startled me. Dorothy, my neighbor and one of the few true friends I still had, stood there holding a container. "Chicken noodle soup, my grandmother's recipe," she announced cheerfully. She was 72, proud of being what she called a venerable old lady. Unlike me, her home was always bustling with children and grandchildren. We shared tea and cookies in the kitchen, and she asked gently, "Have you decided how you'll celebrate your birthday?" "Hopefully with my family," I admitted, "if I can persuade them." Dorothy's eyes narrowed. "You've let them get away with too much. If I were you, I'd have spoken my mind years ago." "They're all I have, Dorothy," I sighed. "No," she said firmly, squeezing my hand. "You have you." "Merle, and that's enough." Her words lingered long after she left. She was right. I had spent years waiting, tolerating neglect, never insisting on my place in their lives. Maybe it was time to act differently. I picked up the phone and dialed Gar's number. He answered with an impatient tone, as if my call had interrupted something important. I tried to sound calm. "It's nothing urgent." "Son, I just wanted to remind you that Friday is my birthday. I hoped you, Tabitha, and the kids might stop by." Muffled voices in the background told me he was consulting her. After a long pause, he said, "We're busy. Tabitha has a presentation. Octavia has rehearsal. Fletcher has practice. But maybe we could stop by for a couple of hours around 2:00 p.m. The sudden hope in my chest nearly choked me. Really, that would be wonderful. "Don't go to any trouble, Mom," he warned quickly. "It doesn't need to be special. We'll just stop in, give you a gift, and move on." Of course. I agreed, but inside, joy bloomed. For once, I would have them all under my roof on my day. Despite his words, I decided to prepare their favorites: eggplant lasagna, chocolate pecan cake, salad for Octavia, and cookies Fletcher had loved as a child. And so, for the first time in years, I felt excited as my birthday approached. They arrived exactly at 2:00 p.m., the car doors thudding in quick succession like a clock striking the hour. I smoothed my sky blue blouse and opened the door to Gar's brisk hug, Tabitha's cool nod, and two teenagers whose eyes barely lifted from their screens. The house smelled of eggplant and tomatoes. The table was set with our good china, and for a moment I let myself believe the food might soften what the years had hardened. In the living room, Tabitha scanned my shelves and framed photographs and called the rooms classic, which was her way of saying old. I pretended not to hear and ushered them to the table. The lasagna was perfect, and for a few minutes the clink of cutlery made a kind of truce. Gar praised the sauce without looking at me. Octavia admitted the salad was fine. Fletcher took seconds with the furtive haste of a boy who has learned to apologize for appetite. I asked about school and work and summer plans, and the answers came in pebbled trickles, brief and smooth, eroded of warmth, when I carried out the chocolate pecan cake. Tabitha dabbed her mouth with a napkin and announced she was watching her figure. She pressed a steadying hand to Octavia's shoulder and reminded Fletcher about calories and practice and discipline. I set a thin slice by each plate anyway, because tradition is a form of love, and sometimes love is stubborn. Gar rose and clapped his hands once like a meeting chair. "Before we go, your present," he said, and Tabitha produced a neat box wrapped in tasteful paper, the ribbon taut and elegant. Something in Gar's eyes flashed strange and juvenile, something I had not seen since the days he tested boundaries the way boys test fences. I untied the ribbon slowly to make the moment last, and lifted the lid. The box was empty. For a heartbeat, my mind filled it with possible explanations, tickets tucked elsewhere. A key to some surprise, a note beneath the tissue, but there was nothing at all. Only the clean blank of absence. My confusion was met by a burst of laughter, so sudden and unrestrained it felt like wind slamming a door. Gar bent at the waist, wheezing. Tabitha wiped tears and declared, "A perfect match." Octavia steadied her phone on my face like a lens could make a person real only when framed, and Fletcher chanted a word a child might invent for hollowness. I pressed the lid back onto nothing and felt something inside me set, not shatter. A lifetime of being careful and accommodating returned to me in an instant and then went quiet, as if the part of me that delayed anger for the sake of harmony had finally run out of places to store it. I told them it was time to leave. I thanked them for coming, for the hour, for the performance. I opened the door to the bright slice of afternoon and stood there until the taillights disappeared. The house exhaled into silence. I sat on the floor with my back against the door and held the empty box until my hands remembered to let it go. I washed the dishes and tossed out the half-eaten food and folded the tablecloth, ritual by ritual, until the kitchen no longer betrayed that celebration had once been attempted here. In the bedroom mirror, a woman in a sky-blue blouse looked back, eyes rimmed red, posture squared with a will I had not called upon in years. I told the empty air that I was not an empty anything. I opened my planner, found Robert Fisher's number, and dialed at 6:57 p.m. He answered on the third ring with the steady voice of a man who has seen grief turn into paperwork. I told him I needed to meet the next morning at 10:00 a.m. to change my will and perhaps one other thing. When I hung up, the house felt less like a container for absence and more like a workshop for decisions. I slept badly but woke certain. The office sat in an old brick building downtown, the kind of place where the stairs remember every footfall. Robert had the same careful manner and a kinder gaze, and he listened without interruption as I described a birthday gift designed to humiliate, and years of smaller neglects that had made the floor beneath me slippery long before the fall. He reminded me of Frank's estate in numbers that still startled me when spoken aloud, shares that had quietly grown, an investment account we had once dreamed of using for travel, and the lakefront parcel Frank had bought the year before he died, where he imagined summer weekends and grandchildren with fishing poles. He had honored my request a decade ago to keep the scope of the inheritance private from Gar. Not out of spite, but out of faith in the dignity of effort. "Do you want to tell him now?" Robert asked gently. "No," I said. "I want to make my decisions without asking permission from the people who taught me I do not belong at their table." We drafted a new will that left everything to places where care still means something: the teacher's foundation, the city library, the animal shelter that placed kittens in foster homes, and a scholarship in Frank's name for engineering students who dream in blueprints. Robert suggested a no-contest clause and an independent medical evaluation to spare my estate the performance of people pretending concern while litigating greed. I agreed to both, grateful for the cool architecture of law when emotion threatens to flood. Then I named the other thing the lakefront land. I asked him to sell it. The request surprised him because he, like I, had long pictured grandchildren on a dock at dusk. But the dock in that vision had never been built, and the grandchildren in my kitchen had laughed at an empty box. I told him I wanted to use the money to change my geography, to trade rooms filled with memories for streets that had never heard my name. He warned me that a quick sale would fetch less than the market might someday yield. I told him sooner mattered more than maximum. On the way home, I stopped at Dorothy's with pastries and the kind of news that makes a friend's eyes go bright. She called it justice, then corrected herself and called it perspective, then laughed and said she would wear beige to the spectacle to avoid looking like a villain in black. We made tea, and by the time the cups were empty, a plan had formed not for revenge, which corrodes the vessel that carries it, but for clarity. I would tell my son the truth when it was no longer a threat or a plea, but a completed act. When the papers were signed, the land sold, the funds moved, the future purchased, I would not ask to be valued. I would value myself. 3 weeks later, every piece was in place. The lakefront property had sold quickly to a developer eager to build a luxury retreat, and the funds were already divided donations to the Teachers Foundation and the City Library. A scholarship in Frank's name, and the remainder transferred toward a cottage in Santa Barbara only 2 blocks from Dorothy's sister. The new will had been drafted, signed, notarized, and sealed with the protective clauses Robert insisted upon. The medical evaluation confirmed my sound mind. as if reason itself needed a certificate. For the first time in a decade, I felt the future was mine to decide. Gar had called only twice during those weeks, each conversation short, distracted, and perfunctory. He had not asked about my health, only about the details of my birthday and whether I had enjoyed the joke. I answered politely and let silence fill the rest. Dorothy came by daily, her presence buoyant. "When you tell them," she said one evening, "please allow me front row." Her mischief made me laugh, and laughter, after years of swallowing disappointment, tasted like freedom. I decided the reveal would come over dinner. I phoned Gar one Friday evening and invited them for Sunday at 6:00 p.m. I let my voice falter slightly, just enough to sound contrite. "I need to apologize for my behavior on my birthday," I told him, "and I have some important news." Suspicion lingered in his pause, but curiosity and greed weigh heavier than reluctance. "We'll come," he said at last. Dorothy helped prepare. We polished the silver franc I had received on our 25th anniversary, spread the white tablecloth reserved for holidays, and filled vases with fresh flowers. The menu was indulgent roast turkey, mashed potatoes, salads, homemade bread, and apple pie. "The last dinner you ever cooked for them," Dorothy murmured, and we shared a look of solidarity. They arrived precisely at 6. Tabitha wore a pearl gray suit as if attending a business negotiation. Octavia trailed with her phone, and Fletcher shuffled behind with his hands in his pockets. Dorothy's presence unsettled them. Gar frowned. "I didn't know we'd have company." "She's here at my invitation," I said. "Please sit. Dinner is ready." Conversation was stilted, filled with nods and half smiles, punctuated by the clatter of silverware. They waited for me to begin my apology. So after the turkey had been carved and the salads tasted, I folded my napkin and spoke. "I need to apologize," I began, and saw relief ripple over Tabitha's face. "I apologize for allowing you to treat me without respect for so many years, for accepting your disregard instead of demanding dignity. That was my mistake." The air froze. Tabitha's smile faltered. Gar's fork clinked against his plate. Before they could recover, I walked to the secretary and retrieved the folder. "Gar," I said, "do you know what your father left me when he died?" "The house and some savings," he answered, guarded. "Not only that, I laid the documents on the table. He left nearly $2 million in stock, $500,000 in investments, and the lakefront land. I never told you because I wanted you to succeed on your own. I lived modestly to preserve it for you and your children. That was my plan, until your gift on my birthday made clear what you think of me." Tabitha leaned forward, her eyes glittering with sudden hunger. Gar gaped. Octavia finally lifted her gaze from her phone, and Fletcher sat stunned. "I sold the land," I continued evenly, "for $1,200,000. Half went to charities, part to a scholarship in your father's name, and with the rest, I bought a house in Santa Barbara. Dorothy and I will be moving there next month." Tabitha's mouth fell open. Gar clutched his head. Octavia stared as if seeing me for the first time. Fletcher whispered, "Wow." "And," I added, sliding out another document, "I changed my will. Everything house, accounts, stocks goes to charitable causes. You will receive nothing." The room erupted. Tabitha leapt up, accusing Gar of foolishness. Gar shouted back, blaming her for turning the children against me. Their voices rose, colliding like waves on rocks. Octavia began to cry. Fletcher stared at his plate, cheeks flushed. "Enough," I said firmly, and the room stilled. "You have shown me what matters to you, and it is not family. I will not fund your contempt. Whatever bond we once had is gone." Tabitha's fury boiled.
We'll contest it. We'll prove you're unfit. That woman she jabbed at Dorothy is manipulating you.
You can try, I replied calmly. The will includes a no contest clause. I have medical certification of my capacity. Legally. You have nothing. Gar's voice dropped to venom. Dad regretted marrying you. He told me. I met his eyes without flinching. Your father loved me every day until he died. That lie says more about you than about him. They stormed out, their fury echoing in slammed doors and squealing tires. Fletcher lingered a moment, whispering, I wasn't laughing at you, Grandma, before being dragged away. Dorothy poured us each a glass of wine. Well, she said, lifting her glass, that was a performance worth the price of admission. I laughed, though the sound carried a tremor. Beneath the relief was a hollowness. I had lost them, but perhaps they had lost themselves first. That night, I barely slept. My body was heavy with exhaustion, but my mind replayed every word, every cruel laugh, every desperate glance between Gar and Tabitha as their imagined inheritance vanished. At dawn, I sat by the window with my tea, watching the street glisten after rain. For the first time in years, I felt no compulsion to justify myself. I had not been dramatic, nor hysterical, nor pleading. I had been precise. They could not twist my actions into weakness anymore. Dorothy stayed the night, her snores rumbling down the hallway like the reassuring noise of a lived-in house. In the morning, she joined me at the table with jam and toast, her presence as casual as sunlight. Do you think they'll call? She asked. Maybe, I said, but only because of money, not me. 2 days later, the phone rang. Gar's name glowed on the screen. I answered calmly. His voice was strained, oddly conciliatory. Mom, about Sunday. We overreacted. It was a misunderstanding. Let's talk again. Just us. It was no misunderstanding. Gar, I replied. I was clear. The property is sold. The will is changed. I'm moving to Santa Barbara. He tried pleading. He tried reason. He tried guilt, invoking Dad's memory, insisting his inheritance was being stolen. When none of that softened me, his tone hardened. We can contest this. We can prove you acted under someone's influence, Dorothy's. Perhaps. Our lawyer says it's possible. Threatening your own mother. My voice was quiet, but he heard the steel. What you want to protect isn't family, it's greed. And that isn't my responsibility. I hung up, my hand trembling only after the line went dead. The calls continued, sometimes from Tabitha, sometimes even from Octavia. Her voice rehearsed in what I recognized as her mother's script. They cycled through apologies, anger, guilt, bargaining, but the rhythm was always the same. They wanted what I had, not who I was. 2 weeks before my move, Tabitha appeared on my doorstep with a bouquet of lilies and a polished look of remorse. I came alone, she said, to apologize. I let her in. The house half filled with boxes. She perched on the couch, her hands folded primly. I haven't respected you. I was too focused on my career, on the children, on my own parents. But I want to make this right. I want the children to know their grandmother. Her words were smooth, but her eyes betrayed calculation. I had learned, finally, to see the difference. It's too late. Tabitha, I told her softly, I'm moving. My decision about the inheritance is final. Her mask cracked instantly. You selfish old woman. She spat, rising. You think only of yourself. What about the children's future? Their future depends on what you and Gar give them, I said calmly. Values, love, respect. not money they never earned. She left in fury, and I stood at the window watching her car vanish. A part of me still wished for reconciliation. But deeper down, I knew she would never see me as more than a wallet in waiting. The days until the move blurred with packing, selling furniture, saying goodbye to neighbors. Dorothy was my constant ally, her energy lifting mine. "Our new life will be warmer," she said, folding linens with brisk efficiency, ocean air, sunshine, and no one treating us like baggage. When the movers loaded the last boxes, I walked through each room of the house, saying goodbye to echoes. Frank's study smelled faintly of pipe tobacco even after a decade. The garden bench he restored still bore the grooves of his hands. I touched the mantel where his photograph rested and whispered, "Goodbye, love. You gave me a home. Now I'll carry that home inside me." We drove away with Dorothy at the wheel. The car packed with the last essentials. The road stretched open, each mile taking me farther from the weight of unspoken disappointments. Santa Barbara greeted us with sunlight and sea breeze. The cottage I had bought was small but bright, with a terrace garden and mountains visible in the distance. Dorothy's sister welcomed us with champagne, declaring, "Here, you'll be 20 years younger, for the first time in so long." I believed her. Santa Barbara unfolded like a gift I hadn't known I deserved. The cottage smelled of new paint and salt air, its terrace blooming with roses that Dorothy and I planted together. Our hands busy in soil that held no memories except the ones we were just beginning. Every morning, I walked 2 blocks to the ocean, breathing in the sound of waves breaking like an endless reminder that everything passes, everything renews. Dorothy thrived too, shedding years as she joined her sister's circle of energetic retirees. She joked about becoming the belle of the boat club after a brief flirtation with a widowed sailor. And for once, her laughter wasn't just for my benefit, it was light and free. It wasn't long before we were folded into a community of neighbors and friends. At a barbecue hosted by Eleanor, Dorothy's sister, I met Gordon Parker, a retired professor with sharp eyes and a kindness that reminded me of Frank. He spoke with humor about literature and listened with genuine interest when I talked about mathematics. We began meeting at concerts in the park, lectures at the library, and sometimes over coffee on my terrace, trading thoughts on books we read. I still felt married to Frank in a way, bound to the memory of our years together. But Gordon became a friend. A companion in the quiet hours when conversation itself feels like a form of shelter. Months passed, and Gar's calls grew infrequent. Once a month, sometimes less, always clipped and polite. He no longer mentioned the will, though the silence around it felt heavy, as if he were waiting for a chance that would never come. One afternoon, unexpectedly, he asked, "Are you happy there?" "Mom." His voice sounded almost sincere. "Yes." "Gar," I said after a pause. "I am happy here," he answered. "Then I'm glad. No false sweetness, no edge of calculation, just plain words, for a moment. I let myself imagine he meant them, but I held no illusions wounds as deep as ours did not close so easily. Nearly a year after my move, a letter arrived, a real letter, in a stamped envelope, the handwriting shaky but familiar. It was from Octavia. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of both hope and disappointment. Inside, her words spilled raw and unguarded. She admitted shame for the way she had treated me, confessed the birthday prank haunted her, and described how her parents fought constantly, blaming each other for what they had lost. She wrote of finding old photo albums in the garage, pictures of her father as a child, of Frank and me young and smiling. "What happened to us?" "Grandma," she asked, How did we become this? She told me she was graduating and planned to study psychology in San Diego, wanting to understand why families wound one another. She ended with an apology. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I hope you will. I read the letter twice, 3 times, tears stinging not from pain but from relief. For the first time, a crack of light in what I thought was a sealed wall. Dorothy found me with the letter in hand and said softly, "Will you answer her?" "Yes," I said, though I needed time to shape the right words. The next week, I wrote back, telling Octavia that I bore no grudge, that I understood she had followed her parents' example without realizing the harm. I told her I was proud she chose psychology, proud she wanted to make sense of the patterns that had trapped us. I made clear that my decisions about inheritance and my life in Santa Barbara would not change. But I left the door open for her. "If you want to visit, my home is open. If you want to call or write, I will always answer, whatever happens. I love you." When I sealed the envelope, I felt something inside me ease. Forgiveness. I realized was not for Gar or Tabitha, it was for me, for my granddaughter, for the possibility that some things might still be salvaged from ruin. The weeks after I sent that letter carried a new kind of stillness, softer than the silence of neglect I had once endured. This stillness was chosen, grounded in peace. I kept busy volunteering at the library, joining the local gardening club, even daring to take art classes where my crooked sketches made me laugh instead of blush. Dorothy often teased that we had become California girls, and sometimes, under the bright Santa Barbara sun, I almost believed her. One evening, Gordon and I walked the beach as the sky burned pink over the horizon. I told him about Octavia's letter and my reply. He listened carefully, then said, "Forgiveness doesn't erase what was done, Merle, but it loosens the chain you've carried. You don't owe them reconciliation. You owe yourself freedom." His words stayed with me, a quiet confirmation that I had not surrendered, but chosen wisely. Months later, a second letter from Octavia arrived. She wrote about college life, her first psychology lectures, and how she had begun to understand the patterns of control and neglect woven into her family. She told me she kept my reply in her desk drawer and read it whenever she felt overwhelmed. "It reminds me that love can survive mistakes," she wrote. I wept with gratitude that at least one soul in that tangled family had found courage to grow. Gar called once after that, his voice stiff and rehearsed. "Octavia mentioned she's been writing to you. I hope you don't fill her head with things against us." "I only tell her I love her," I answered. "That is all." He sighed, muttered something about being busy, and ended the call. It was the last time I heard his voice. As the seasons turned, Santa Barbara became not just a refuge, but a home. Dorothy and I hosted small dinners with neighbors, planted herbs along the terrace, and took long walks through farmers' markets scented with citrus. My days filled with people who valued my company without condition, who wanted nothing from me but my presence. It was astonishing, after years of being treated as a burden, to realize how simple real companionship could be. On the anniversary of my move, Dorothy poured us each a glass of wine. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. I looked around our little cottage, the roses blooming in the garden, the sound of the ocean carried on the evening breeze. "Not once," I said. "I lost people who chose to see me as empty. But I found myself, and that's more than enough." The truth is, life did not end at 68 when I sat on the floor with an empty box in my hands. It began again. I discovered that dignity is not given by others, it is claimed. That sometimes Family can wound deeper than strangers. But healing can come from unexpected places, from a friend's laughter, from a granddaughter's letter, from the courage to walk away. So here I am at 69, no longer waiting at a rain-streaked window for calls that never come. I am Merle Hadley, teacher, widow, mother, grandmother, and a woman who finally learned that self-respect is the inheritance we give ourselves. If my story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength inside ordinary lives. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below about what family means to you.